Britain and France involvement in education in Cameroon, 1922 to 1960/61. The departure of the Germans in 1916 following their defeat saw the British partitioning the territory, which, though initially said to be provincial, came to last until 1961. The Germans administered Cameroon from 1984 to 1914, when their ambitions for the territory were cut short by the First World War. Being a battlefield, most of the Germans' educational institutions were destroyed, and their eventual defeat saw the partition of the territory by Britain and France in 1916. Between 1916 and 1962, Britain and France dominated the territory as part of their colonial possessions in Africa. With the formation of the League of Nations in 1922, purposely to ensure world peace as well as prevent future wars, Cameroon was placed under the mandate of the League of Nations stated in Article 22, Paragraph 5. As part of the mandate agreement, Britain and France, among other things, declared their intentions to be responsible for the promotion of the material, moral well-being and the social progress of their inhabitants. Education in French Cameroon is divided into two, the mandate and the trusteeship period, as well as that in the British Cameroon. The French and the British mandate. This was from the period 1922 to 1946 after the Second World War. British and France ruled their respective part of Cameroon under the supervision of the League of Nations. France administered French Cameroon as an autonomous territory within its colonial empire and French Equatorial Africa. Britain, on the other side, administered southern Cameroon as part of Nigeria. French Cameroon enjoyed a more elaborate school network during this period than the British Cameroon, which was ruled as part of the colonial territory in Nigeria. As you can see, this is a map of Cameroon showing the two territories. You can see French Cameroon and you can see British Southern Cameroon, and you can also understand that British Cameroon was divided into Southern Cameroons and to the Northern Cameroons. Education in French Cameroon during the mandate period. The French colonial administration began to exercise its authority in education as early as the 1920s, following the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. In 1922, the League of Nations formally recognized France as a mandatory power over Cameroon. Between 1920 to 1921, two government orders were signed regulating private and public schools. The order prescribed education in French following a prescribed government syllabus for schools. Schools were only to receive financial support from the government if they followed the syllabus. In the 1921 order regulated public schools and arranged them into 5 categories: village schools, regional schools, higher primary schools, domestic science schools, and vocational schools. These orders, that is the 1920 and 1921 orders, were subsequent followed by orders in 1925, 1927, and 1930. These orders guaranteed steady educational expansion and collaboration between the government and voluntary agencies. By the end of the French mandate, there were in French Cameroon 137 public primary schools, 1,188 private primary schools, 3 private higher primary schools, 5 public secondary schools, and 2 private secondary schools. Education in British Cameroon during the mandate period. Education in British Cameroon during the mandate period started off less smoothly than in the French administered sector. There were no British missionaries ready to take up the work begun by the Germans, as was the case in the French sector. Educational policy for French Cameroon was formulated in Yaoundé, while educational policy in British Cameroon during the mandate was formulated not in Buea but in Lagos, and always as an appendix of educational policy for Nigeria. In 1926, regulations that guided education in British Cameroon during this period was the Nigerian Education Code. This Nigerian Education Code contained issues on administration and school management, categorization of schools, registration of teachers, the opening and closing of schools, and also during the mandate period, the following categories of schools emerged in British Cameroon. You had government schools, native authority schools, assisted mission schools, unassisted mission schools, post-primary schools. Government primary schools were set up at divisional headquarters only. They were well staffed with qualified trained teachers and had adequate facilities in terms of buildings and equipment. There were only 6 government schools during this period. The native authority schools were run by the various native authorities set up according to the principles of indirect rule favored by British colonial policy. The assisted mission schools were those that met government set standard and therefore received financial support from the government. Toward the end of the mandate were Elementary Teacher Training College at Kake, later moved to Kumba. The Catholic Mission opened the only secondary grammar school in 1939 at Sase. The Basel Mission had one teacher training college in Nyasoso, and the Catholic Mission had one teacher training college in Ginicom and Basse. In the British part of Cameroon, the first school for the training of teachers was opened in Victoria in 1922 but was later moved to Buea and renamed the Normal College. French and British trusteeship. This lasted from the period 1946 to 1960 and 1961 respectively. At the end of the Second World War, which ranged from 1939 to 1945, a new world body, the United Nations Organization, was created to replace the League of Nations. The UNO was divided into 6 organs, one of these being the Trusteeship Council. The mission of the Council was to help speed up the process of self-government and independence for these territories. Emphasis during the trustee period was laid on post-primary and professional education in both the French and British administered sectors of Cameroon. This is a map demonstrating the territories during the trusteeship period. As we can see, British Southern Cameroon is close and linked to Nigeria, and while French Cameroon is linked to French West Africa. The trusteeship period in French Cameroon. The years of the UN trusteeship in French Cameroon saw an unprecedented rise in the number of primary schools, with their enrollment tripling the mandate period. The higher primary school concept disappeared, giving rise to that of secondary schools. Higher primary schools were converted to secondary schools. The trusteeship period also witnessed the establishment of many technical schools, teacher training institutions, and the beginning of private-led education. Adult education was encouraged and Cameroonians began to receive scholarships awarded to study abroad in various fields. Coming to the trusteeship period in British Southern Cameroon, educational legislation drawn up for Nigeria continued to be applied to the British Southern Cameroon. An independent board of education for the Southern Cameroon was set up in Buea, with authority equal to that of boards existing in the other regions of Nigeria. Enrollment in primary education tripled and more emphasis was given to secondary and professional education, which received financial support from the Colonial Development and Welfare Fund. Number of secondary schools rose from 1 to 4. Creation of the Government Trade Center at Ombe in 1952. More teacher training centers were set up and educational authorities established scholarship schemes, which a number of Cameroonians began to study abroad for higher qualification in different fields. Summarily, the two colonial powers were supervised by United Nations. Collaboration between government and voluntary agencies in education was strengthened. Government control and responsibility increased tremendously. The demand for education by Cameroonians rose sharply as the struggle for independence intensified.